They said it was just clutter, an old piano taking up space in a one-bedroom apartment, but she refused to sell her grandmother's piano, no matter how desperate things got. Everyone thought she was being emotional, until she opened it. Inside wasn't just wood and strings. It was a hidden fortune and a legacy that had waited 70 years to be found. Before we dive in, hit subscribe for more stories that stay with you, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Abigail Foster was 34 years old and already felt like life had wrung her dry. Her days started before the sun and ended long after her daughter was asleep. She juggled 2 exhausting jobs, mornings at a hospital cafeteria, evenings scrubbing floors in downtown offices. There was never enough time, never enough money. And now, with an eviction notice taped to her apartment door, she was days away from losing the only roof she and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla, had over their heads. There was only one thing left to sell: her grandmother's piano. It wasn't just any piano. It was the heart of her childhood. A battered 1920s grand that had filled her grandmother's farmhouse in rural Kentucky with Chopin and lullabies. It was where Abigail learned her first notes, her fingers guided by hands weathered with time and love. Her grandmother, Clara, had raised her when no one else would, teaching her that music could mend even the deepest cracks. But survival doesn't care about sentiment. Abigail stared at the old piano in her living room, the last piece of Clara she had left, and knew what she had to do, even if it shattered her heart. The piano was scheduled for auction on a gray Thursday morning. Abigail stood in the back of the community center, arms folded tight across her chest, watching strangers comb through her grandmother's belongings like they were nothing more than junk in a thrift store. Clara Foster's life, 40 years of carefully kept china, hand-stitched quilts, travel souvenirs, photo albums had all been reduced to lot numbers and sticky notes. Everything had a price, even the piano. She'd hoped maybe no one would notice it. Maybe it was too old, too weathered to attract any serious bidders. Maybe she could buy herself one more month, one more chance to fight. But when the auctioneer called out Lot 112, the 1927 baby grand piano with chipped ivory keys and faded walnut finish, Abigail's stomach twisted. $100, a man in the back said casually. $150. $200. Sold for $200 to the gentleman in the gray suit? Abigail's breath caught. She hadn't bid. She hadn't even raised her hand. But it was over. "Wait!" she called out, stepping forward too quickly, nearly knocking over a folding chair. The auctioneer gave her a look over his glasses. "The sale is final, ma'am. That piano, it belongs to me, to my family." "Then you should have placed a bid." The man in the gray suit didn't even glance at her. He was already filling out paperwork with the auction staff, casually chatting like he had just snagged a deal on a fine piece of furniture. Abigail pushed past a couple inspecting a lamp that used to sit in Clara's reading nook. "Please wait." The man turned. His face was handsome in a polished, indifferent way, like someone who'd never known hunger or desperation. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone mild but laced with condescension. "That piano," she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "It was my grandmother's. It's all I have left of her." The man gave her a once-over, taking in the second-hand coat, the broken zipper, the worry lines etched into her face. "A little late for sentimentality, don't you think?" Her face flushed. "The entire estate went up for auction because someone didn't pay the property taxes," he added coldly. "That someone wasn't me." She flinched. "I tried. I called everyone. I asked for help. No one answered. Not my concern." And just like that, he turned away. Abigail stood frozen in the chaos of the sale, surrounded by voices haggling over prices, children tugging at coats, and the hollow echo of lives being picked apart, piece by piece. The dining room table, where Clara used to serve peach pie on Sundays, sold for 85 darbs, the cabinet of teacups from China, $120, the handmade quilts from Long, Lonely Winters, $25 for the bundle. Everything gone. Outside, the November wind bit through her coat as she sat in her rusted-out Corolla, staring at the steering wheel, tears finally spilling from eyes she had tried so hard to keep dry. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A text from Mrs. Alvarez, her kind neighbor who watched Layla after school. "Layla's asking when you'll be home. She has something to show you." Abigail sniffed, wiped her face on her sleeve, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, then started. The heater, broken since last winter, offered nothing but cold silence. She drove back to the edge of town, to their cramped two-bedroom apartment with walls so thin you could hear the neighbor sneeze. The rent had gone up again, second time in a year. She didn't know how much longer they could stay. Mrs. Alvarez opened the door before Abigail even knocked. "You look frozen," she said gently, letting her inside. Abigail shook her head. "They sold it. The piano?" "Oh, Abby!" Layla came running in from the kitchen, wearing her school uniform with smudges of paint from art class. Her hair was in two lopsided braids, and her face lit up when she saw her mother. "Mom, look what I made." She dragged Abigail to the kitchen table, where a drawing lay on construction paper. In it, 3 people stood in front of a house, 2 on the ground, 1 floating above with angel wings. A piano sat in the window, surrounded by music notes. "That's you and me," Layla said proudly. "And that's great-grandma Clara watching from heaven. We're playing her piano together." Abigail's throat tightened. She knelt down and hugged her daughter hard. The kind of hug that says, "I'm holding myself together because of you." "I love it, baby. It's beautiful." Layla hesitated. "Can we go visit the piano? I want to play it one more time." Abigail didn't answer. She couldn't. "Did something happen?" She swallowed. "Sweetheart, the piano's not ours anymore. Someone else bought it." Layla's small face crumpled. But great-grandma said it was for us. She told me before she died. She said the piano was our inheritance." Abigail blinked. "She said that." "Yeah, she told me. The piano holds the key to everything. Don't let anyone take it away." The room fell quiet. "Mrs. Alvarez raised her eyebrows. Abigail stared down at the picture. Again, the angel. The music. The message. She'd assumed Clara was just being poetic. But suddenly, those words echoed like a riddle wrapped in a warning. The piano holds the key to everything. That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. She lay on the lumpy mattress in their tiny bedroom, staring at the cracked ceiling while Layla breathed softly beside her, curled up like a comma under their only warm blanket. The words kept repeating in her head, louder than the wind outside. The piano holds the key to everything. Clara had been lucid until the end. Even on her last day, weak from the cancer, she'd held Layla's hand and whispered stories. Clear as day. If she'd said something like that, she meant it. She always meant what she said. Abigail sat up slowly, heart racing. Maybe it wasn't just a sentimental statement. Maybe it was something more. She slipped out of bed, grabbed her coat, and tiptoed into the living room. There, she found her grandmother's old keyring, the one she'd never been able to throw away. Most of the keys were useless now, but one had a little piece of red yarn tied around it. Clara used to say that one was for the back door just in case. Abigail grabbed it, and her car keys. Mrs. Alvarez was still awake, watching a soap opera rerun with the volume low. When Abigail knocked, she opened the door without hesitation. "I need to go somewhere. Can Layla sleep here for a few hours?" The older woman looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly. Is this about the piano? Abigail nodded. I think there might be something inside it. Something my grandmother meant for me to find. Mrs. Alvarez didn't ask questions, just nodded and stepped aside. Go. 20 minutes later, Abigail stood in the alley behind her grandmother's old house. It was boarded up, now empty, silent, stripped bare. The county had padlocked the front door after the auction, but Clara's kitchen window, that thing hadn't latched properly in decades. Abigail tried the back gate, locked, but she was small. She scaled it. The tomato plants Clara used to tend were now dead stalks, rattling in the cold wind. The porch sagged under her boots as she reached up to the kitchen window. With a push and a loud squeak, it popped open. Her breath fogged in the cold air. She hesitated only a moment, then climbed inside. The house was hollow. Every piece of Clara was gone. No rocking chair, no record player, no smell of lavender or vanilla candles, just silence, dust, and faded memories. Abigail stood in the living room, staring at the empty spot where the piano had sat for nearly 50 years. All that remained was an indent in the carpet and a few flattened dust bunnies. She knelt down, running her fingers over the compressed fibers. What were you trying to tell me? Grandma, she whispered. She thought about the piano's construction. Her grandmother had it shipped from Tennessee in the 70s, had it restored by a specialist, refused to let anyone touch it. Not even during hard times, not even when she had to sell her car. Clara would have protected it with her life. Abigail's heart began to pound. The piano was hollow. It had a soundboard cavity, an internal space most people didn't even know existed. Plenty of room to hide something. Her hands trembled. What if she wasn't just being poetic? What if the piano literally held the key to everything? She pulled out her phone and searched for the auction house's number. It went to voicemail. She left a frantic message, her voice shaking. This is Abigail Foster, the piano you sold earlier today. I think there's something inside, something important. I need to know where it's going. Please call me back. It's urgent. Then she called the only other person she could think of, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. Miles Granger, an old friend of Clara's, a semi-retired attorney who'd helped draw up her will years ago. Clara had trusted him. That was enough. He picked up on the third ring, voice groggy. Abigail, everything okay? No. I think my grandmother hid something in the piano that was just sold. Money, documents, something important. She told Layla it was our inheritance, and I think she meant it literally. Silence. Then, are you sure? No, but I can't ignore it. If I'm wrong, I'll look like a lunatic. But if I'm right? Another pause. Then Miles said, Okay, listen carefully. The sale might not be finalized yet. In this state, there's a 24-hour holding period for estate assets sold over $100. If you can convince a judge that the piano contains personal property not intended for sale, you might be able to stop the transfer. Abigail nearly dropped the phone. Can you help me? I'll meet you at the courthouse. 6, sharp. But Abigail, if you're wrong, you could be liable for legal fees. The buyer's costs, it could be thousands. I know. I'll take the risk. After hanging up, she stood once more in the cold, empty house. The same house where she had learned to play Clair de Lune by candlelight, where Clara's voice used to fill the silence with stories, lullabies, and wisdom. She whispered to the room, as if Clara were still listening. I'm going to find it. Grandma, whatever you left for me, I'll find it. And for the first time in weeks, a flicker of something sparked inside her chest. Hope. At 5:30, Abigail stood outside the courthouse, bundled in a borrowed coat, her fingers numb and her heart racing. The morning sky was still ink black, and the streetlights buzzed softly in the frozen air. She clutched a manila folder containing every piece of paper she had left Clara's will. A handwritten note about the piano, Layla's crayon drawing, and tried not to think about how everything depended on the word of a child and the memory of a dying woman. Miles Granger arrived 10 minutes later, holding a thermos of coffee and a worn leather briefcase. "You look like hell," he said gently, handing her the thermos. "I feel worse. You ready?" "I don't think that matters." They walked inside together. By 7:45, Miles had filed an emergency petition with the probate court requesting a temporary injunction to halt the piano's transfer. By 2:00 p.m., they were standing in front of a judge. Judge Helen Whitaker was in her late 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the air of a woman who had long ago run out of patience for excuses, but not compassion. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. The only other people present were a court clerk, the buyer of the piano, a smug man named Richard Ashford, and his sharply dressed lawyer. Miles stood up. "Your Honor, my client, Abigail Foster, is requesting a 48-hour stay on the transfer of a piano sold during a recent estate auction. We have reason to believe the piano contains personal property, possibly of significant value, that was never intended to be part of the sale." The opposing lawyer scoffed audibly. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The piano was purchased legally, at a public auction. Miss Foster had every opportunity to inspect or reclaim personal items before the sale. She didn't. Now she's having second thoughts and trying to undo a legal transaction." "I'm not trying to undo anything," Abigail said, surprising herself as she stood. "I just want to open the piano. I think there's something inside something my grandmother meant for me to find. She told my daughter, before she passed, that the piano held our inheritance. Her exact words were, 'It holds the key to everything. Don't ever let anyone take it away.'" Judge Whitaker peered over her glasses. "Do you have any documentation to support that?" "No, Your Honor. Just my grandmother's word, and my daughter's memory." Ashford's lawyer rolled his eyes. "This is hearsay. We're setting a dangerous precedent if we halt every sale based on some whispered bedtime story." But Judge Whitaker didn't flinch. She turned to Ashford. "Mr. Ashford, how much did you pay for the piano?" $200. "And what do you estimate its value to be after restoration?" "Well, conservatively, 12 to 15,000. The judge nodded. "So you made quite the deal. That's how estate auctions work, Your Honor." "Indeed." She paused. "Mr. Granger, if we allow your client to inspect the piano, and nothing is found, what then?" "We will reimburse Mr. Ashford for any storage and inconvenience, and we will drop the petition." Judge Whitaker turned back to Abigail. "And if you're wrong," Abigail took a deep breath, "then I'll live with it. But if I'm right, if there really is something hidden inside, then it was never part of the estate sale to begin with." Silence settled over the room. The judge folded her hands. "Here's my ruling. I am granting a temporary stay on the transfer of the piano for 72 hours. During that time, Miss Foster and her attorney will be permitted to inspect the piano's interior under the supervision of a court-appointed representative. If personal property is discovered clearly hidden and clearly meant to be excluded from the sale, we will reconvene to determine rightful ownership." Ashford's lawyer started to protest, but the judge raised a hand. "You'll be compensated for your time. Mr. Ashford, you still have your piano." Then she looked directly at Abigail. "Miss Foster, I sincerely hope your grandmother's words were more than just a metaphor." Abigail nodded. "So do I." The next morning, Abigail stood in a temperature-controlled warehouse at Goldfinch Movers and Storage, staring at the piano for the first time since the auction. It looked smaller than she remembered, but older, too worn and quiet, like it was holding its breath. She ran her hand gently along its lid. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm here." The court-appointed representative, a stern woman named Karen Doss, checked her clipboard. "You have until noon?" Miles handed Abigail a set of tools and a pair of gloves. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure about anything in my life." She knelt beside the piano and began unscrewing the underside. Her fingers moved on autopilot, remembering every story Clara told her, every lesson they'd played together, every moment Layla had sat beside her, tiny hands reaching for the keys. Screw by screw, layer by layer, she peeled back decades. Finally, just before noon, she reached the soundboard. And what she saw made her breath catch. Inside, nestled deep beneath the old wood, wrapped in faded cloth and sealed boxes, were stacks of gold coins, jade jewelry, and an envelope marked in Clara's shaky handwriting. For Abigail, the truth about our family. Abigail covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Miles stood beside her, stunned. Karen stared in disbelief. She had been right. Clara had hidden something extraordinary. Not just an inheritance, but a legacy. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back row, cameras perched on shoulders, whispers buzzing like bees. County officials filled the benches, their faces stiff with tension. Richard Ashford sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, arms crossed, his jaw tight. On the other side, Abigail sat beside Miles Granger, gripping her copy of Clara's letter so tightly the paper crinkled in her hands. Judge Whittaker entered, glasses perched low on her nose, and silence fell like a curtain. "We are reconvening the emergency hearing regarding the sale and disputed contents of a 1927 baby grand piano." Her eyes flicked down to the paperwork. "Miss Foster, you may proceed." Abigail stood. Her voice trembled, but not with fear this time. "When we opened the piano, we found over 3,000 gold coins, Chinese currency from the Qing dynasty. Alongside them were carved jade jewelry pieces. And this..." She held up the letter. A sealed note from my grandmother, written in her hand, addressed to me. The judge motioned for the bailiff, who took the letter to read aloud. As his voice echoed through the courtroom, the words unfolded like a time capsule. "My dearest Abigail, if you are reading this, then the time has come. These coins, these jewels, they are not simply money. They are the last remnants of our family's legacy. My mother gave them to me in 1949 before sending me to America. She told me protect them, and one day pass them on when the time is right. I never used them because selling even one would have betrayed her sacrifice. I lived simply so you could live freely one day. Now, that day has come. This is your inheritance not for comfort, but for purpose. Use it to build, not to hoard. Use it to heal, not to hide. And always remember the music never dies, even in silence. With love, Clara." By the time the bailiff finished, even the court reporter had stopped typing. Judge Whittaker cleared her throat. "And these coins and jewels, they were hidden inside the piano." "Yes, Your Honor, beneath the soundboard, in a concealed cavity that would only be accessible through full disassembly." "And were they listed in the estate inventory?" "No, ma'am. Mr. Ashford." The judge turned. "You purchased the piano for $200. Did you have any knowledge of its contents?" He looked like he had swallowed a lemon. "No, Your Honor, but I bought it fair and square. If there was value inside, that should be mine." Judge Whittaker nodded thoughtfully. "You bought a piano, not a vault." Ashford's lawyer objected. "Your Honor, this sets a dangerous precedent. Hidden items within furniture. This isn't a vintage cigar box with old photographs." The judge interrupted. "This is a deliberate concealment of priceless heirlooms, backed by a personal letter and historical context." She leaned back, tapping her pen once. My ruling is as follows. The piano remains Mr. Ashford's legal property. However, the items hidden inside were clearly not part of the estate sale and were never intended to be transferred. I declare the coins and jewelry the personal property of Miss Abigail Foster as the intended heir. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Abigail's knees went weak. She gripped the table for balance. The judge continued. Furthermore, due to the historical and potentially international significance of the artifacts, I am ordering them to be appraised, authenticated, and temporarily secured under supervised custody. She looked at Abigail, her voice softening. Miss Foster, your grandmother trusted you with more than wealth. She trusted you with purpose. I hope you honor that. 3 weeks later, the final appraisal came in. $112 million. The coins rare Qing Dynasty gold, carefully preserved, were valued at over $75 million. The jade jewelry, some traced back to the late 1800s, added another $30 million. A few rare pieces were deemed museum-worthy. News outlets called Abigail the piano heiress. Her face was on the evening news, her story shared across the globe. But Abigail avoided interviews. She wasn't interested in headlines. She had work to do. The first thing she did was pay off the $8,000 in back taxes owed on Clara's home. Then she paid Richard Ashford $50,000 for the piano, not because she had to, but because Layla deserved to play it again. Then she went back to where it all began. The house on Willow Street. She walked through its halls with tears in her eyes. The peeling wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, the kitchen where Clara used to bake lemon bread on Sunday mornings. It was more than a house. It was a heartbeat. She wrote a check to the county, not just for the assessed value, triple. I want it back, she told them. Not for me, for the music. The deed was transferred within a week. Within months, the Clara Foster Music Academy was born. Free music lessons for underprivileged children, scholarships for young musicians, therapy programs using music for healing grief and trauma. It started with one house, one piano. But it didn't stop there. Abigail set up the Foster Foundation, dedicated to helping single mothers, working-class families, and anyone one crisis away from falling apart. She built grant programs for renters, partnered with schools, quietly paid off medical debt for people she'd never meet. One afternoon, as she stood in the renovated music room, watching Layla play Clair de Lune on the restored piano, Abigail realized her grandmother hadn't just left her a fortune. She had left her a calling, and Abigail Foster had finally stepped into it. A year had passed, and yet, some mornings, Abigail Foster still woke up expecting to put on her janitor's uniform, still half dreading a pink eviction notice taped to the door. Old habits are hard to break, especially the ones born out of survival. But those mornings were no longer followed by despair. They were followed by purpose. Abigail had used only a fraction of the inheritance. The rest, she didn't hoard it. She activated it. The Clara Foster Music Academy was now fully operational, offering lessons in piano, violin, guitar, even voice. Children from all walks of life, immigrant families, single-parent homes, foster care youth walked through those doors and found something they'd never had before. A place to be heard, a place to belong, a place to grow. Abigail hired music teachers who believed in healing over perfection. Many of them had stories like hers, former students turned mentors, artists who once struggled to afford lessons themselves. The piano. Clara's piano sat proudly in the main hall, fully restored, with a small brass plaque mounted inside the lid. The music never dies, even in silence. Clara Foster. Every student touched those keys like they were sacred. And in a way, they were. But it wasn't just the academy. Abigail had become something she never imagined. A leader, a builder, a voice for those who lived in the margins, too tired to speak. Through the Foster Foundation, she created grants for women escaping domestic abuse, for parents drowning in medical bills, for students on the brink of dropping out not because of grades, but because they couldn't afford gas, food, or textbooks. But she never made announcements, never held press conferences. She just showed up, quietly, steadily, just like Clara did. And in the middle of it all, there was Layla, now 8, growing taller and braver by the day. Layla had blossomed in ways Abigail could never have imagined. She played the piano like it was breathing. Her small fingers now moved with intention and control, no longer hesitant. She was learning Chopin, Debussy, even composing her own lullabies. One evening, after a lesson, she asked, "Mom, do you think Great-Grandma can hear me when I play?" Abigail smiled, kneeling beside her. "I think she hears every note, especially the ones you play from the heart." Layla nodded solemnly. "Then I'm gonna play louder." Despite all the good happening, Abigail still carried something deep inside her, a quiet kind of grief. Not for money lost or time wasted, but for never truly asking Clara the questions she'd buried so long. Who were you before you became Grandma? Where did you come from? What did you leave behind to build this life? Those answers had been sealed in silence. And now, Abigail knew that silence wasn't emptiness. It was protection. Clara had carried the weight of her family's survival, never breathing a word of the treasure hidden in the piano. She'd lived simply, sewing buttons, baking bread, humming old melodies, never once hinting that she sat on a fortune. She could have sold 1 gold coin and lived in comfort. But instead, she waited. Waited for the right moment, waited for the right person, waited for the one who would understand what the treasure was really for. Abigail had asked herself 1,000 times, "Why me?" But the answer always came back the same. Because Clara knew. She wouldn't waste it. She would multiply it. Not in interest, but in impact. One Sunday morning, Abigail visited the cemetery where Clara was buried. The ground was covered in soft spring grass, sunlight warming the marble headstones. She brought fresh peonies, Clara's favorite. As she knelt beside the grave, she whispered, "I get it now. I really do. You weren't protecting money. You were protecting meaning, and you trusted me to carry it forward." She placed a small music box on the stone. Inside, a tiny ballerina spun to Clair de Lune. Layla had made it herself. Abigail let the music play. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it was enough. When she stood, a breeze lifted the edge of her coat. Somewhere behind her, a child laughed, a car door slammed, a dog barked. Life went on, as it always does. But Abigail walked away with something new inside her. Not guilt, not fear, but clarity. Her life wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about orchestrating something bigger, composing a future Clara could be proud of, one note at a time. 5 years had passed since the day Abigail Foster almost lost everything. 5 years since a cracked piano and a child's drawing cracked open a hidden legacy. And now, she stood at a podium in front of over 300 people gathered for the opening of the Foster Center for Family Renewal and Financial Empowerment, a sprawling space in the heart of the city dedicated to families like hers. Inside were classrooms for financial literacy, legal aid offices, free childcare, therapy rooms, and, in the very center, a music hall. And on the stage sat the piano, Clara's piano, polished to perfection, the keys restored, but the soul unchanged. On its lid still shone the small brass plaque, "The music never dies, even in silence." Abigail looked out at the crowd students. Single mothers, donors, teachers, and a few faces she didn't recognize, but somehow already loved. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. I was a single mom, working 2 jobs, 1 bad month away from homelessness. She began softly. And then, my grandmother died, and everything fell apart. A hush fell over the room. No cameras, no media, just people. She didn't leave me a check, or a will with stocks or property. She left me a piano and a sentence. The piano holds the key to everything. She smiled gently, voice thick with memory. I almost ignored it. I almost let it be sold and forgotten. But a little girl reminded me to listen. And when I did, I found more than coins and jade. I found my family's story. I found a woman, my grandmother, who lived through war, exile, poverty, and still believed in beauty, in music, in me. She paused, letting her eyes scan the audience. She could have used that fortune for herself, but she chose to carry it, to hide it, to protect it not for comfort, but for purpose. And now, that purpose lives here. She gestured to the center surrounding them. In this building, single parents learn how to rebuild. Teen moms learn how to budget. Kids learn how to play music and speak their truth. Families reunite. Survivors heal. And people who once felt invisible finally feel seen. Applause started softly, then grew. Abigail took a breath and closed with the words that had become her compass. The greatest inheritance isn't wealth, it's trust. Trust that someone will take what you give them and use it to lift others. She stepped away from the podium to a standing ovation, blinking back tears. Not for herself, but for Clara, for the sacrifice, for the silence that had protected a legacy. That evening, after the celebration, Abigail returned to the music hall with Layla, now 13, tall and confident, with a quiet grace that reminded everyone of Clara. "Ready?" Abigail asked. Layla nodded and sat at the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, then descended with fluidity and emotion. She played Claire de Lune, just as Clara had so many years ago. The notes echoed through the empty hall, soft and luminous. Every phrase carried weight, memory, and meaning. And as Abigail listened, she wasn't just hearing music. She was hearing Clara's voice, her laughter, her lullabies, her whispered lessons about resilience and grace. When the final note faded, Layla turned. "Do you think she heard it?" Abigail didn't speak for a moment. Then, with tears in her eyes, she whispered, "I don't think she ever stopped listening." They sat in silence, bathed in the lingering music and moonlight spilling through the windows. Abigail reached out and touched the polished wood of the piano, her fingers resting gently on the edge. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me, for seeing in me what I didn't see in myself." Because all of it was never about the money. It was about memory, about meaning, about music that keeps playing even when no one's listening. And in that quiet room, as mother and daughter held each other close, the music played on. The greatest treasures in life aren't always wrapped in gold or hidden beneath floorboards. Sometimes, they live inside the quiet, ordinary things we almost throw away: a piano, a memory, a promise. Clara Foster didn't leave her granddaughter money. She left her meaning. She believed in something deeper than wealth, in the power of legacy, the strength of family, and the music that carries through generations. She trusted that someone one day would be brave enough to listen to what was left unsaid. And Abigail Foster did just that. This story teaches us that true inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in impact. That sometimes love is shown not in what's given openly, but in what's protected silently. and that even in silence, music and love never truly die. If this story moved you, subscribe. More powerful, true stories are on the way.